Good evening. My name is Raja Khalidi. I'm here on behalf of the co-sponsors, namely the Khalidi Library, Jerusalem, Kenyon Institute, Jerusalem, the Jerusalem, and of course, never to forget the Educational Bookshop, Jerusalem. This is our first event together, all four of us. I think we should do more of them. We're all working in the same area of concern. We're cultural institutions trying to raise the profile of Jerusalem, but also we're trying to organize things in Jerusalem for people in Jerusalem, to the extent that people in Ramallah were saying, why did you organize the thing in Jerusalem? Why didn't you do it in Ramallah? We said, well, Jerusalem has needs its share of activities. Anyhow, so I will try not to be very long in my introduction, but I asked to be given the chance to introduce Professor Prashad, who we'll henceforth refer to as Vijay, partly because it was my idea to bring him to organize this in Jerusalem at least, but also because I'm probably, of those in the room, the person who knows him, well, I won't say the best, the longest period. And I just want to tell you a couple of things about Vijay Prashad. The first time I ever heard his voice and his ideas what was the anniversary of the 77, the group of 77 in
group
Dream.
of 7. Okay.
So it was an anniversary. I was working in the United Nations in an organization called UNCTAD, and there was a meeting going on downstairs, which was the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the non-aligned movement.
Okay.
And they have a system in the UN. You can listen to the music, to the meeting rooms sitting in your office, so you don't have to actually go down there. And all of a sudden, there was this guy saying things I had never, or for a long time, hadn't heard been spoken in a UN meeting. So I went down, picked up a few studies about Palestine, and I ran downstairs, and there was this guy, and so I introduced myself, and that's where we became acquaintances. However, Vijay is somebody who I got to know both through his words and through his actions. And I'd just like to give you, his words, you can help, we'll be hearing from him, I'm sure, many of those ideas and very important sort of conclusions that he's able to come to about the issues he'll be talking to about tonight. But he has many other areas of concern. Some of his books are on the table, The Poorer Nations, which is a history of the South in the multilateral setting, and The Darker Nations, which unfortunately isn't here, but we should make sure you get it because it's a history of the South in terms of its overall global emergence, what Vijay will call the global South, and we can have arguments about that all night. And there's other work that he's done on Palestine, and there's other work that he's done on Libya, but he's also a prolific journalist, indeed what I referred to as a sort of intrepid Tintin type journalist. So this is a guy, and this is what I wanted to tell you about his actions. This is somebody who not only writes about what he believes in, but he's political, obviously. And so he is very happy if somebody comes along and says there's a cause you need to do something about. So in 2012, when the organization I referred to, UNCTAD, was in the middle of a crisis in terms of the struggle between the North and the South and the sort of demands the North was making on the developing countries, in the run-up to its quadrennial ministerial conference, there were some people in the secretariat who felt that there were things going on in the closed rooms that needed to be public. I won't say, sort of WikiLeaks level, but certainly there were machinations and things going on that needed to be brought out. So a few birdies got some information to this gentleman, who then started, you put an article here, an article there, and then we got, I think, who was it? Jayati wrote something, and then Robert Wade wrote something, and then it was in The Guardian, and then it was all over the place. And as a participant in those events, I can attest to the fact that action, through those words, changed, for better or worse, the outcome of an important conference on development organized in 2012 in Qatar, UNCTAD. Anyhow, my point is that this is a man of many talents. He is a great militant and supporter of Palestine and the causes of the oppressed, and it's our honor to have him with us tonight to speak about a subject very painful, I'm sure, to him, namely the tilt of India to Israel.
Oof.
تفضل دكتور.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Well,
take
that
your-
was a... No, can I sit down?
Yeah.
Is it okay? I'm lazy. Today's been a long day. We had a conference in Ramallah, so some of people are here from there. It was a long day. Anyway, this guy, what an introduction, crazy.
It's a good one.
Actually, at that UN meeting, I was sitting there on the stage and somebody came behind and slipped the books. He slipped the books from behind me, so I actually didn't see. And then I saw him zip off. The UN is a surreal institution. Anyway, thanks for having me here. I'm so glad that I could come to Palestine. I won't go into the dreary story of my problems entering here, but now I can safely say I'm only banned in one country in the world, and that's Saudi Arabia. So, that's used to be two, now only one. So, it's a good day now. I'm telling you a story that I really hate to have to tell you, which is the shift in policy of the Indian government, or perhaps of the Indian ruling class. And very soon it is likely that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is a great traveler, you know, we were joking in a newsroom, we were saying, you know, next time Modi goes abroad, we should tell him to bring back a kilo of onions, because the price of onions in India has gone up and he keeps going abroad. So if he keeps bringing back kilos and kilos of onions on the Prime Minister's plane, he can stabilize the onion prices. He goes here, there, he likes to take selfies with Tony Abbott. It was great that everywhere he went, there was a string of foreign visits. All the leaders he took selfies with lost in the next election. So, but he is coming to Israel, and he will be the first Indian head of government to come to Israel. You recently had the Indian president, Pranab Mukherjee, who, because he comes from Bengal, where I was born, has a very strong Bengali accent and continued to call Hamas hummus. Just like Dr. Ben Carson, who was also calling Hamas hummus. This is a problem, it seems. So Pranab Mukherjee, who is a very distinguished Indian politician, now the president, he is the head of state, which is largely ceremonial constitutionally. He was here, he went to Ramallah, he had a bunch of events, he went to, I think, a village where India has a development project in the West Bank.
University, Quds University gave.
Al-Quds gave him a thing, yeah, exactly, and he gave a couple of addresses. But when Modi comes, that's going to be significant, because that's the first head of government coming. In 2003, I wrote my first book on this subject, because then Ariel Sharon came to India. He was the first Israeli head of government to come to India. That was in 2003. And the book I wrote was called Namaste Sharon. And the reason to write it, our idea was, we'll write this short book and we'll deliver it to the embassy. And basically when he comes, we'll throw copies of it in the airport. But unfortunately, the printing didn't happen in time. So these frisbees could not be produced fast enough. But we thought we'll greet him. Namaste Sharon, Namaste Sharon. One of my comrades, when the Shah of Iran came to India in 76, Jayaraman jumped on his car, the Shah's car. He got his bones beaten. But in those days, you could get that close to a head of state. You could jump on the bonnet of the car. The Shah of Iran was petrified. There was a great photograph in the Times of India of Jayaraman on the bonnet and the Shah's face. But by 2003, because we live in the era of terrorism, there is no democratic way to get close to any democratically elected leader. So, you know, you can make of democracy what you want.
Not to mention the
Non-democratic. Non-democracy. Exactly. Anyway, Modi's entry now will close the circle of Sharon's visit to India, in a sense. First time these heads of governments will have come. Now, why is this important? Why should you care? You see, India plays a very interesting role in the group of countries in the United Nations and in other international agencies, countries of the so-called South. Despite whatever problems India is highly respected in this group. So for instance, in 2005, Condoleezza Rice, then National Security Advisor of George W. Bush, came to New Delhi in order to tell the Indians to stop building a pipeline or planning a gas pipeline from Iran through Pakistan into India, the so-called peace pipeline. And Rice's message to India was, we will give you a nuclear deal, even though this is illegal, and we can talk about this later. India is not an NPT signatory. We will bring you out of the nuclear cold if you vote against Iran in the International Atomic Energy Agency meetings. And India voted twice against Iran. This produced a little tremor in the countries of the South, which felt if India votes against Iran, maybe we can. And I'm going to come back to why this is important. So this idea of India joining Palau, United States, etc. in the UN, voting against some General Assembly motion censuring Israel. If India joins Palau, Western Samoa, those countries, it brings a great deal of heft to the vote. And then perhaps other countries may join. Countries that previously felt it's forbidden to join this vote against the Palestinian people. So there is something significant here. One of the main things I'm going to concentrate on in this is arms deals, because you might know or may not know that India is the world's largest importer of arms. I don't know if you knew that. India imports in the table of countries of arms importers, India is the highest number. The United States is the highest exporter of weapons, but India is the biggest importer of weapons. India doesn't import its weapons from the United States. Half of Israel's arms exports are purchased by India. This is something I want you to pay attention to. I'm going to return to it. So this question of why this is an important issue, one, it's a diplomatically important question, because the question of how India votes is very significant for Palestine. It's not an insignificant, faraway issue. It's a tangible issue. Secondly, in material terms, India participates in underwriting the occupation by buying half of Israel's arms exports. Half of Israel's arms exports. So this is a very significant, this is the reason why I'm glad to see you here, because I feel this is an important issue for us. Okay? So this is not just about India, it's marginal to the problem of the Israel-Palestinian issue, marginal to, actually it's very significant. Now, India from 1948 till 1992 had minimal diplomatic ties with Israel, which is interesting. In my passport as a kid, it used to be stamped in the last page, admission to all countries except Israel and South Africa. Israel disappeared in 92 from that stamp. It then used to say only South Africa for 1.5 years. And then apartheid regime ended, and now passports are clean. It doesn't say you can go anywhere. Of course, nobody will give you a visa to go, but that's a separate problem. The Indian government allows you to go. Other countries will deny you visa, but that's their problem. Now, India is not going to stop you from going anywhere. South Africa you can understand because the colonization process ended. It decolonized in 1994. In India, in Israel and Palestine, the decolonization process has not succeeded, and yet it has disappeared from the stamp. You can go here to Israel even though it remains an unfinished decolonial project. Okay, so the question is why from 1948 to 1992 was India so adamant to have this position on Palestine? It's a good question. The right wing, including Mr. Modi's party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, argue that the reason why this position was held by India for so long was because of the Indian Muslim lobby, and because the ruling Congress party appeased Muslims. That's the basic right-wing position, also held by a distinguished scholar of India's Israel policy, who teaches at India's main university, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He wrote a book called India's Israel Policy, in which he made this argument that Indian Muslims as a lobby held India back from having a natural relationship with Israel. It's a very interesting argument. Unfortunately, this argument is totally incorrect. Okay, you understood the argument that there's a Muslim lobby. Now, you have to understand something about India's so-called Muslim lobby. Yes, it's true. There are perhaps 120 million Muslims in India. India perhaps has got the second largest Muslim population in the world. Indonesia, then between India and Pakistan, it goes back and forth, then Bangladesh. You realize that, I mean, when in the West, when they talk about Muslims, they are totally illiterate. They don't understand that in this part of the world, there are hardly any Muslims compared to that part of the world. You know, in Indonesia, there's what, 160 million Muslims? You know, I don't know how many total, what is the aggregate Arab population? 250. So add Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, let's throw in for the hell of it the Rohingyas of Burma, that South Asian area, and I think you'll dwarf.
600-700 million.
Yeah, it's about 60-70% of the world Muslim population lives in that part of Asia. So the idea that Indian Muslims have such a hold on the Indian political process is bewildering, because they are largely an impoverished population. You know, they are not a highly elite population. One way to go around that is to say they function as a vote bank. Even this is bewildering, because it's hardly the question that among Indian Muslims, Palestine was so central. Because if you have a vote bank, let's say, Muslim vote bank, it's not like among Indian Muslims, your position on Palestine is a deal breaker. If the Congress party had said we'll normalize with Israel, that doesn't mean that Indian Muslims will say now we won't vote for you. It's not a deal breaker position. So this argument that the right makes and that some scholars make is totally bogus. There's actually a simpler argument. This is Occam's razor. Sometimes the most obvious answer is the correct one. What is the obvious answer? In the first phase of Indian diplomacy, from 1946, let's say, till about 1983, the principal approach of the Indian government to most of the world was through the logic of so-called non-alignment. Not allying with the West, not allying with the Soviet bloc. Underneath that were two fundamental principles of non-alignment as far as Indian diplomacy was concerned, and politics, foreign politics. One was the idea of disarmament, was very important, meaning that the West and the Soviets and then the Chinese were going to lead us into nuclear Armageddon, and therefore the third world, a non-aligned bloc, had to fight like hell for disarmament. So, you know, in the West, Western historiography always says that International Atomic Energy Agency was created because of Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. But actually this is a Bandung demand. This comes from these countries, and they fought like hell to create the IAEA. You know, they may not have agreed with what came out, because India didn't eventually have a full participation in IAEA, but they fought to have disarmament. That was a very important plank of non-alignment. Second important plank of non-alignment was decolonization. All colonies must be free. This was a huge part of the thinking of foreign policy. Nehru made it a very considerably important part of how the Indian government analyzed different countries in the world. So Nehru at one point said to the Indian diaspora, "You are not ours. If you live in Kenya, you are Kenyan. We have special affection for you. You will have special affection for us, but there's no such thing as an overseas Indian. You are Kenyan first." Nehru gave a brilliant speech about this. There was no attempt to say all these millions of Indians in Trinidad, Guyana, etc. should be overseas Indians. He said that's destabilizing. You have to create your own nations. India will not colonize in the way the West colonizes. We free our diaspora to become nationals of other countries. Build your nations where you live. Decolonization was that important, that this strategic asset that was there, say in Guyana, Trinidad, was not mobilized. It was freed. Palestine was seen entirely as the problem of colonialism and decolonization, which is why in the entirety of the early years, India took strong position on Palestine, but also confusing in the early period because India tried to take a middle ground. But I'm not going to go into those details because this takes us to the Partition Commission, to the bloody one report after the other, the compromise document that came from India, rejected, etc. But the main point is the decolonization principles cemented India's understanding that the Palestinians are colonized people who need liberation. It was not the Indian Muslim position, but it was the non-aligned position that drove this policy. In 1961, when the non-aligned movement was created as an actual movement, as an institutional movement, the pro-Palestinian line comes in with the South African line through decolonization. These were two forms of apartheid that had to be dismantled. Okay, so NAM institutes it directly under the heading of decolonization. That's how they saw it. They saw Palestinians as a colonized people. This is 1961. In that decade, I was saying in Ramallah, I enjoyed telling this story because I liked the story of what the PLO did. Because what the PLO did in that decade was amazing. I want you just to imagine the following. Today, what is the sum total Palestinian population? 12 million is the figure thrown around. Let's say 15 million.
No, 12.
Okay, let's just say 15. Why I say that? I was born in Calcutta. There are more than 15 million people in my city.
So,
What's the population of Jerusalem?
which one?
The,
300.
everything.
A million, sorry.
Some days my mother's building, my mother's 86 years old, feels like it has 1 million people in it. My mother lives in a building in Calcutta, no lift. She walks up and down the stairs. It's because there's almost 1 million people in the building, somebody carries her stuff up. Okay, I want you to understand this country of Palestine, which in 1964 must have had 7 million, 8 million, whatever. How did this country become an international agenda item? This is a nothing population. It's extraordinary what the PLO does. What the PLO did, which was really smart, was they took this tiny struggle, which admittedly is where the UN learned to be the UN, because it was a laboratory of every UN agency, admittedly. Yet, PLO took this struggle, small struggle, and yoked it to the Vietnamese movement. And if you look at the early PLO magazines from that era, they had drawings like a Vietnamese peasant with a peasant hat, with a gun, holding hands or linking arms with a Palestinian peasant with a keffiyeh, peasant Bedouin dress, with a gun.
That was a 72 poster on the occasion of the victory of...
But the magazines had it in the 60s already. Because they made a very important point. They said, our struggle is like the Vietnamese struggle. And in saying that, there was already global consensus, pro-Vietnamese consensus in the anti-imperialist camp, that suddenly Palestine becomes the next thing in the sentence. Freedom for the Vietnamese, freedom for the Palestinians. You know, it's extraordinary how they were able to do this in the 60s. And having done this, they took the decolonization framework and made it national liberation. Now what happens with that, this may not immediately sound intuitive, but what this does is it unites two major fragments of the global third world blocks. On the one side, it unites the more establishment third world sections, the Nehrus, the Titos, the Nassers, that kind of crowd, the big men of the third world, with the radical section, the Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Organization, APSO, the Che Guevara side of things. The left and the center of the third world bloc all became pro-Palestinian. That yoking of the decolonization framework with national liberation, it was very important. So in other words, by 1970, the majority of the planet was pro-Palestinian. How this is done in one decade, I find amazing. It was very clever politics. And if you have a negative view of the PLO, at least look at the history and say, wow, that was amazing. Because I personally think it was something. Anyway. In 1983, when Arafat came to Delhi to the non-aligned meeting, he was met at the airport by Indira Gandhi, middle of the night. She personally came. By the way, when Indira Gandhi was shot in 1984, in November, Arafat came for the funeral and wrote a beautiful article saying, my sister has died. This was the interesting thing. When I was a child, I remember the iconography of Arafat. He was not a human being. He was a silhouette. That messy kafia falling down, that smile, that symbol was very important. He symbolized a struggle. You know, this, by the way, is no longer the case. I don't know what the image is of the Palestinian politics now, but it ain't any of this.
It's the Arafat Kafir.
It's Arafat kafia, but there's no Arafat. It's just the kafia. You don't have the embodiment of the struggle. Anyway, point I'm trying to make is that NAM meeting in 83 was very important because it's the last big NAM meeting which had guts. They took certain positions. Why? Two things were happening that really killed off this development. One was that killed off this independence of the NAM, of the non-aligned bloc. One was that in the 80s, these countries were suffering from a terrible debt crisis, which was not of their making. And I don't have time to get into this, but they were not to blame. In fact, I'm going to tell you something. In a few weeks, Janet Yellen of the New York Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates. US Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates. And she will not raise it in the same way as Paul Volcker raised it in 1979, which was called the Volcker shock, which sent the third world into a debt crisis. But the interest rate rise she is going to do is going to create some serious liquidity problems in Brazil, in India, in the whole South. You know, there will be some serious problems. There's no parachute for this lack of liquidity when the Americans call money back to America. It's a serious, that's what they did, and they created a debt crisis in the third world, and these countries had to pay for a problem which was not their making. It was like a subprime mortgage crisis for the third world. Okay, they were lent money, they changed the rules, meaning the interest rates went up and they went into... So one was they suffered from a serious debt crisis, that was important. And secondly, they suffered from a severe ideological crisis. Because on the one side, the Soviets had begun to decline quite precipitously, even by 84, 85, 86. And you began to see in the Reagan era, Reagan and Thatcher era, a certain aggressiveness develop from the West about its position vis-a-vis the rest of the world. That aggressiveness that starts in the Reagan-Thatcher era, whether it's invasion of Grenada in 1983, the United States just comes in, overthrows the government, a Falkland War of 1982, this certain aggressiveness developed. But these are just the tea leaves. This is nothing. This was the foreshadowing of what is coming. The two foreshadowings. One, these countries cleaned up World Bank, cleaned up IMF, threw in their own people, worst kind of characters who believe that you need to beggar countries in order to make them proud. Amazing theory. You make them poor so that they become rich. How does that work? I don't know. Apparently they had PhDs from Harvard, Stanford, Anna Kruger, people like that, very smart people. That was one, they were cleaning house there. Secondly, they sent Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the United States, to the United Nations to basically smash the United Nations into smithereens. Now, you'll ask me, what does it have to do with Palestine? Everything. Just a second. 83, 82, you see this aggressiveness begin. This is the period when the third world bloc or the third world project is collapsing. 1973-75 was the highest point of that bloc. 73 was when they created the oil weapon, the new international economic order. 1975 was the resolution, Zionism is racism, passed with unanimous support in the United Nations General Assembly. That was the high point of the strength of the third world bloc. And Palestine, imagine this, that they passed a resolution in the General Assembly, Zionism is racism. It's incredible. It was a direct emotional, ideological support to the Palestinian struggle. That you could not have much more powerful ideological support than the countries of the world saying that the governing ideology of Israel is racism. It's incredible. In the 1980s, when Moynihan goes to the UN, one of his express briefs, because you can read his conversation that Nixon has with him, Nixon sends Moynihan and in the 70s, late 70s, and says, go and clean up the mess there. Moynihan's memoir of his years in the UN is called A Dangerous Place. Why is it dangerous? Because these brown countries are giving hell to the West. We should be able to drive our agenda. You got to smash them. Okay. Phase 1, the Third World era. That is when Palestine on the international stage was lifted up through the discourse of decolonization and national liberation. The highest point was this point about Zionism is racism, 1975. Phase number 2 opens up in 1990. This is an important phase. I told you earlier you had inklings. You had 83, Grenada, this, that. 1989, United States government aerial bombards Panama. How many of you remember the war on Panama? United States government aerial bombs Panama, bombs civilian neighborhoods, sends in special forces by parachute, seizes the elected, so-called elected, he used to be with the CIA, government president of Panama, Manuel Noriega, brings him to Florida where he's still in prison. It was extraordinary. Never seen anything like this. A country just comes in, okay, United States overthrew Arbenz, Guatemala, 54, but they didn't seize Arbenz after US bombing and bring him to Florida. They had the Guatemalan military come in, they green lighted it, military came in, overthrew Arbenz, disgraced him, stripped him naked in the airport, sent him off to Mexico. Eventually he committed probably suicide in his bathtub. But the US didn't do it directly. They stood behind and told the military, go do it. Panama was the first time the United States unilaterally acted abroad. Regime change was the new period. Saddam, when he invaded Kuwait, didn't expect the United States to do regime change because he was still living in the Third World era. So was Yasser Arafat because he supported Saddam. So were many countries of the NAM because they also supported Saddam. When Hafiz al-Assad decided to support the West against Saddam, it was a surprise to people, including in his own Syrian Ba'ath party. How can you join the West, even though we hate Saddam, how can you join the West and send troops to Kuwait? What's going on? But Hafiz al-Assad is perhaps one of the shrewdest people because he had his finger up in the air and saw that the wind was changing. What was changing was the era of the Third World had ended. The era of US unipolarity had opened. And this period goes from 1990 to 2003 or 2004. This period is defined by various things, basically by the idea that the United States should write the rules for the planet, what George H.W. Bush called make a new world order. The United States should push forward a certain economic agenda, which we call neoliberalism, and the United States, in the name of helping civilians, should be allowed to do regime change. They will designate countries as rogue nations, and they will do humanitarian intervention. These were the three basic principles of this new era of unipolarity. The Indian government sniffed this as well. So under the leadership of P.V. Narasimha Rao, who was with the Congress party, the ruling Congress party, Narasimha Rao understood that two things needed to be done immediately. Now, India had a historic relationship with the Soviet Union and also ran this so-called pseudo-mixed economy. Private sector, public sector, grab bag, Egypt-style cronyism. 6 families run the steel industry. The rate of growth is steady at 3.5%. But, some poverty alleviation, education, literacy rates had gone up. There were some benefits anyway. Narasimha Rao decided, he knew that this change had come. Two things needed to happen. One was India needed to so-called liberalize, open the economy to foreign capital. Secondly, India needed to pivot from being friendly with the Soviets to being friendly with the United States. At this juncture, India goes to the International Monetary Fund under our common friend Manmohan Singh, who was then the finance minister and later becomes the prime minister. Manmohan Singh led the charge to liberalize the economy. But this close relationship with the United States was complicated. How to make this? I interviewed a number of senior officials from the Rao period, and the general sense was the road to Washington for India has to go through Tel Aviv. That one of the ways to demonstrate that you actually are sorry for your close relationship with the Russians, you're sorry for your non-alignment philosophy, you're sorry for all this, is normalize with Israel. If you normalize with Israel, then we will say, okay, now you are mature. You are a mature democracy. If you don't normalize with Israel, you are immature. You might even be a rogue state. So you should normalize. In 1992, therefore, in this new period, the Indian government opens diplomatic ties with Israel. Now, you see, what I mean is, nowhere in this is the domestic Muslim population important. They're not a factor. They don't play a role. This is a totally different story. Okay? Now, remember I said arms are important. United States government is a strange government. Because on the one side, we know they overthrow governments at will. CIA coup, Mossadegh, 53, somebody here, arms sold. They sell arms to the great democracy of the Arab world, Saudi Arabia. They are friendly with this, that. You know, it's incredible. Contradictory foreign policy. So, because there's pressure from a certain bloc inside the US Congress, there's a law that says if you violate the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, then we cannot sell you arms of certain kind. AWACS, certain arms that can utilize, that can carry nuclear weapons, long-range bombers, things like that. This is a weird and difficult law for the American president, because many of their friends are scoundrels around the world who are scofflaws, who don't follow these things. It just happened that India, of course, had exploded nuclear bombs in 1974. But that was a long time ago, prehistory. In 1998, in this new period, India's right-wing government, same party that currently ruled then in 98, exploded nuclear bombs in Rajasthan. Now, this posed a serious problem, because having exploded the bombs, Americans couldn't sell arms to India. Russia at the time was in great crisis. Putin hadn't arrived without his shirt. Until that happened, Russia was in doldrums. One man saved the whole of Russia. Now there are icons made of 3 Putins. You can buy this on the web. I asked one of those Marushka doll makers, will you make a Marushka doll with me where each doll is Putin? You keep opening, it's Putin, and inside baby Putin. I thought that would sell really well, Putin wasn't there. Russian arms economy was in crisis, military was in crisis. So in 98, India had a serious supply problem, and India has never been big buyers from France for reasons I won't get into. But Israel shows up and starts selling at that point. Now, Israel is a great cutout for American companies, because most of Israel's arm manufacturing is joint with American arms manufacturers, except they don't have to follow US congressional laws. So essentially you can buy American quality weapons from Israel, but you don't have to break the Pressler agreement, this restriction, that restriction. So why the Congress government that followed the right-wing government in 98 continued to buy arms was because this agreement prevented buying arms from the US. And Russia was not yet back online. So India has become an amazing purchaser. As I said, half of Israel's exports, arms are bought by India. Not necessarily for programmatic reasons. Not necessarily because there's some conspiratorial alliance. Some of this is principally pragmatic or practical. Who is the biggest arms buyer in the world? India. It needs to buy arms from somewhere. Who is the biggest arms seller? United States. United States cannot sell a lot of arms to India. Who do you buy from? You could buy from Russia. No. So Israel. So I'm not justifying India's arm buy, I'm just putting it in context. Okay? So this is the situation.
Follow the guns.
Follow the guns. So first was the road to Tel Aviv, road to Washington goes through Tel Aviv. That was, you want to make a link with America, you have to normalize. Secondly, you start buying weapons because you can't buy from America. It's bizarre, okay? Number 3, in the 1990s, this new discourse emerged of anti-terrorism. That terrorism was the principal problem of the world. At that time, the rogue state doctrine had been enunciated, and they defined rogue states as North Korea, Iran, Cuba, etc. These were not terrorism. These were rogue state actors. Parallel to this, especially when Al-Qaeda started to operate, the discourse of terrorism comes. Now, you all know that when the word terrorism is spoken, it means Muslims. Like in USA, when there's a shooting, when a white person shoots people, that's a deranged individual. Muslim shoots people, the whole Muslims have killed the people. I mean, you're responsible. This discourse of terrorism was very, very advantageous to the Indian right, because they then yoked very complicated and diverse problems, such as Kashmir, for instance. It has its own particular history and problems that have to be sorted out, such as issues of disgruntlement of domestic Muslim populations, such as relations with Pakistan, such as relations with Bangladesh. These are 4 different and highly concrete problems that have to be dealt with at the level of concreteness. They cannot be dealt with at the level of abstraction. With Bangladesh, the issue has to do with water resources. Issue has to do with the question of migration back and forth, so-called infiltration of Bangladeshi refugees. These are concrete problems. They require concrete solutions. But the Hindu right took the opportunity to start talking about the terrorism threat, which they meant Muslims. This allowed Lal Krishna Advani, then the right-wing home minister, to make an actual programmatic relationship with Israel and with the Israeli right wing. So when he came to Israel in the 1990s, he gave a famous speech where he said, firstly, the 3 points he made. Second point bewildered me, or third point. First point was, we are both democracies. Okay, let's take it at face value. Second point, we both have a Muslim problem. That was interesting. Now you've reduced the Palestinian struggle to a Muslim problem. This is as reductive as reducing the Bangladesh issue to a Muslim problem. As I said, Bangladesh problem is water, concrete issues. It's not a Muslim problem. You reduced it. Thirdly, he said, we want to learn from you, because apparently Israel had solved its Muslim problem. I remember writing an article in the Hindu saying the Home Minister needs to understand that Israel is actually not solved anything. The fact that there is all these bombings and things means their policy is a disaster. You don't follow a policy because it means security. You search for a solution where they have less security. That's a solution. They have come close to a solution. Anyway, so this third thing was pivotal and becomes more important. Now, this was phase number 2, this US unipolarity, when the Indian government chases after America essentially through the vectors of one, diplomacy, second, arms, but then going through Israel for both, and then third, this discourse of terrorism. So that later, the Indian government, again the Hindu right Prime Minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee said, India, Israel and the United States are 3 democracies that have Muslim problems. Okay, so we are yoked together. This is very interesting language. Terrorism is what unites us, Muslim terrorism, what they call Islamic terrorism, or sometimes now the term is radical Islamic terrorism, but what they mean essentially is Muslims. Phase 3 opens up around 2003, when US unipolarity ends. The era of US unipolarity lasts for 13-14 years. It begins to fray by 2003. Now, we have entered a period of transition toward multipolarity. It's not settled yet. This is going to be a long and dangerous transition. In the opening, why do I say 2003? Because the Iraq war demonstrated a couple of things. One, the United States went alone. The whole planet was saying, don't do this, it's a disaster. They said, no, we'll do it. They went alone. Their poodle was with them, Tony Blair. Now he is apparently trying to justify what he did then with different language, but same kind of thing. Fortunately, George W. Bush doesn't want to speak anymore, which is a really good thing, because imagine him now trying to talk about ISIS. I mean, I sometimes long for his ISIS speech. Like, what would he say? You know, he impresses me in several ways. One of the most impressive things about George Bush is he had great reflexes. I would have been hit by the shoe in my head. How he ducked, that was amazing. For a former alcoholic to have that kind of reflexes is amazing. You know, really smashing. Anyway, but you know, that 2003 one was they went alone. Secondly, the Americans demonstrated that they couldn't actually, their power was merely bombing. They don't have the capacity of building on the ground. You know, and then you had these people like Niall Ferguson and others saying, and even Michael Ignatieff, so-called Canadian liberal, saying things like America needs to take on the mantle of empire, learn from the British. You know, go there and learn Arabic and, you know, live in neighborhoods and build trust and all that. But of course, this was not possible, and I just want to make a little side thing. America, actually, it was not merely Iraq, but it was Afghanistan and Iraq. Because what the Yanks did in these two wars was they essentially fought the wars on behalf of Iran. Because they removed Iran's two historical adversaries, the Taliban and Saddam Hussein, and delivered Iran the opportunity to basically have now a robust foreign policy in the region. Because they had been hemmed in by the Ba'ath Party and by the Taliban. So now Iran basically has, you know, its Herati friends in the cabinet in Kabul. It has its allies in power in Baghdad. It has developed a close relationship with the government in Damascus. It has Hezbollah. In other words, Iran could breathe all the way to the Mediterranean and deep into China, essentially. And this was a gift the Americans gave them. It demonstrates that American power was not as omnipresent and omnipotent as it had seemed for that brief 13-year period. Secondly, at Cancun in 2003, India, Brazil, South Africa and China fought against the subsidy regime pushed by the North, particularly again the United States and the Europeans, WTO. Okay, this showed that new things were developing, and we got IBSA, the India, Brazil, South Africa bloc, come out of this. Okay, and then Russia and China join, it becomes BRIC by 2009. Okay, now what is important about that? BRICS is not the important issue. The importance is we are at the threshold of multipolarity. Among these countries, there as well, there is now a fraying consensus on Palestine. These countries essentially adopted the words of NAM. So in the BRICS declarations, when you read them, it sounds like the NAM language, but not the spirit of NAM. So they are cutting side deals with Israel, almost all of them. For Russia and China, it's commerce. For India, it's this mishmash of commerce and ideology and, you know, whatever it is. It's a sort of snake pit of opportunities that Israel has provided. For Brazil, it's complicated by the fact that the biggest pro-Israeli group in Brazil is the very much fast-growing Pentecostal movement inside Brazil. That's going to be, and that's why they sent Danny Dayan to be the ambassador. The Israelis sent Danny Dayan, settler leader, and the Brazilian government was against it, but he had already made links to the Pentecostal movement. So they are very clever, the Israelis. They are making links with these countries. Palestinians have been nowhere here. They have not. In fact, one of the great tragedies is Palestine does not have an ambassador in China. It's extraordinary. China and Russia, after this long period of unipolarity of America, have reconstituted relations. They are conducting military exercises together. They are beginning to harmonize some elements of foreign policy. They are increasing trade. They are coordinating in terms of communications and pipeline networks. They are creating a pole which will oppose the Western pole. Now, one of the important things is how in Palestine people think about these developments. India is not able to break fully from its Palestinian commitment because the BRICS commitment is more important than the Israel commitment. Let me say that again, and with a concrete example. In the last couple of bombings of Gaza, from caste-led onward, I mean, come on, 2009, 12, 14, the first Indian government statement, whether it was the Hindu right government or the Congress United Alliance, didn't matter. Congress government, led government or right-wing government, in 2009, 12 and 14, the first statement that came from the government was anodyne. We want peace between, ceasefire, call on all parties to desist, First statement was like this. Inside Parliament, the left used to go crazy, this is wrong, but they were not able to drive agenda themselves. Palestinian council, the embassy ambassador would say, this is outrageous. We would give an interview to the Hindu, say, this is outrageous. Our people are being slaughtered. 500 children are already dead. This statement cannot come from India. We need stronger condemnation. And then the BRICS statement comes out. Says, we condemn the Israeli bombing. We call for a ceasefire. But they always condemn. Then a second Indian statement comes out. We condemn the bombing. So what I'm trying to say is that it actually appears on the surface that India is tilted fully to Israel. But this BRICS commitment, which commercially and in terms of geopolitics is more important, is stopping a full-scale alliance. In the United Nations, only once has India, to an extent, broken with the consensus on voting on Israel. When the 2014 report on Gaza war went to the Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Council decided to forward the report to the International Criminal Court. It was basically a unanimous vote to send it to the ICC, because now Palestine is a member of the ICC, and Bensouda, the leading prosecutor, had said, if Palestine were a member, I would open a file on Israel. And so in 2009 they didn't, because Palestine was not. 12 there was no real report. But 14 there was a report, and the Human Rights Council sent it to the ICC. India abstained. Now this was interesting. There was a big hue and cry. Has India changed its position at the Human Rights Council? Because it abstained. It would normally have voted yes. So I wrote a piece about it saying, why did you abstain? The Ministry of External Affairs in a statement said, we abstained not because it's Palestine and Israel. We abstained because they forwarded it to the ICC, which India is not a signatory to. India is not a signatory to the ICC. So I wrote an article 5-6 days later saying, but earlier in the year, India voted yes to forward 2 files to the ICC on Syria. Yeah. So explain it now. Then the revision was very interesting. They said the ICC Syria forwarding was not actually actionable, meaning those were to ask the ICC to open a file on atrocities in Syria. They were not sending a document saying, I thought this is splitting the very finest of hairs. But the point I'm trying to make is, yes, there has been a tilt. It is a very serious development. It is not isolated to the case of India. It is happening in much of the global south. This tilt is of grave concern. And the gravest part of this concern, what I think you can do something about, is you can put pressure on Palestinian civil society and on Palestinian political leadership to not neglect relationships with the South. The old decolonization and national liberation consensus is gone. You cannot rely upon these countries to emotionally vote for you. We are in a new phase. If you are not building active movements alongside BDS type movements in Brazil, etc., you will lose these countries. The problem with the Palestinian civil society movements is they're too obsessed with Europe and America. They have done nothing to link with China. At the very least, I hope I am going to get some of you to ask the leadership why they have not sent an ambassador to China. Why there is no Confucian Institute in Ramallah teaching young Palestinian children Chinese? Because the Chinese will set that up for free. Why there is no attempt to build cultural diplomacy bridges with India? And I'm going to tell you a last story and then I'll end. Right now, in New Delhi, I am an editor at a place called LeftWord Books, which is in Shadipur, a neighborhood near Karol Bagh in Delhi. It's a what you would call a shabby neighborhood, from which the word shabby comes, or no? No. I often thought about that.
Shabby.
Shabby. English always take good words and make them bad. So, you know, so, shabby. Anyway, so this is a working class neighborhood, and we have a bookstore very much like this thing, but not so beautiful. It's a genuinely working class neighborhood. We have a bookstore, cafe, office for LeftWord. Upstairs there's the women's organization, trade union, teachers front, and a theater group. And right next to us is a black box theater. Right now, 6 to 8 members of Freedom Theater from Jenin are in Delhi, and they are with Jannatya Manch, People's Theatre Group. From day one, they improvising a play together. And so they had no script at all. These 6 to 8 Palestinian actors from Freedom Theatre. It just turned out that the Freedom Theatre's founder, Giuliano Mer Khamis, was assassinated, and one of the founders of Jannatya Manch, Safdar Hashmi, was also assassinated. So there was an emotional tie between these two companies. Jannatya Manch is a communist theatre group. Freedom Theatre obviously has not got that kind of politics, but anyway, this play that they are making is going to tour India. From next week, I think they will be in Lucknow, and then they will go to Bangalore, to different parts of India. Next year, they will bring it to Palestine. These are the kinds of small level solidarity that build an impression. The Freedom Theatre Jannatya Manch production, small little solidarity, has produced so much press in India. Every day there's almost an article about something or the other. It brings Palestine alive. If I asked my Indian friends who is a Palestinian poet, the more literate people would say Darwish. I'll ask, who is a Palestinian poet from today? Nobody knows.
Well, we don't have any.
I ask, what is the Palestinian book have you read? Nobody knows. If I ask you, who is the Indian writer today that you know? You may say somebody who lives abroad. Arundhati Roy, she lives in India. Good. But our interconnections are not only political. The way to build movements and go against this tide has to be cultural, social, educational, related to cultural, political of course, and deeply concerned about the negative connections, but not merely concerned about the negative connections. You cannot be negative without building something positive. So when we attack the military buying, we have to produce a play. You cannot do one without the other. Thanks a lot.